By 1949, Levitt and Sons was advertising a larger Long Island house for $7,990, with $90 down and a $58 monthly payment that covered the mortgage, interest, taxes, water, and fire insurance. A government-backed path to little or no down payment borrowing also existed for eligible veterans. Those figures made ownership look cheaper than nearby rent for many qualified families. But this was not a law of personal finance. It was a product of mass construction, cheap land, a severe post-war housing shortage, and federal credit support arriving at the same time. The mistake came later, when one unusually favorable market was compressed into the moral slogan that rent is always wasted money. That post-war bargain was never offered on equal terms. National Park Service histories document that restrictive covenants and other discrimination excluded Black, Asian, Latino, and Jewish families from many suburban developments, including Levittown. Federal policy helped build wealth, but access to the machine was filtered by race, class, and place. That matters to the rent versus buy story, because the celebrated result was not created by a house alone. It depended on who could obtain the loan, where public infrastructure went, and which neighborhoods were allowed to appreciate. Any lesson drawn from Levittown without that exclusion is not merely incomplete history, it also mistakes a selective opportunity for a universal financial rule. Before the federal mortgage overhaul, HUD says many loans covered only about half of a property's value, ran for 3 to 5 years, and ended with a balloon payment. A household could make every scheduled payment and still face a large refinancing risk at maturity. Congress created the Federal Housing Administration in 1934 to ensure qualifying mortgages and reduce lender losses. That insurance helped lenders stretch repayment across much longer terms and lower the cash barrier for approved borrowers. The familiar amortizing mortgage was therefore designed, regulated, and subsidized. It did not emerge naturally from a timeless preference for ownership. Changing the financing system changed which monthly payment families could carry. The 1944 GI Bill added a federal guarantee for eligible World War II veterans. The original guarantee covered half the mortgage up to $2,000, and the 1945 revision raised the maximum to $4,000 and extended the repayment period to 25 years. VA's own history also records that the program enabled home loans requiring no money down, although early limits initially made the benefit difficult to use in a housing shortage. The crucial point is not that government made ownership free. It shifted risk, lengthened repayment, and reduced the cash demanded at the door. That changed the comparison with rent for millions of eligible households. The census record shows the scale of the transition. The national home ownership rate was 43.6% in 1940, 55% in 1950, and 61.9% in 1960. Census historians attribute the post-war surge to a booming economy, favorable tax laws, easier financing, transportation, and large-scale subdivisions with affordable homes. Those numbers prove that the country changed quickly. They do not prove that every buyer beat every renter, or that the same conditions continued forever. A population statistic describes what households did under a particular set of policies and prices. It cannot decide whether one household should buy one property at today's rate and today's total cost. Rent pays for shelter and transfers repair risk to the owner of the building. A mortgage payment buys shelter and can build equity, but principal is only one part of the owner's cash flow. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau tells buyers to count interest, property taxes, homeowners insurance, mortgage insurance when applicable, association fees, and maintenance. Utilities can also differ between a house and an apartment. Comparing rent with principal and interest alone is therefore an incomplete comparison. The honest question is not which payment feels more respectable. It is what each housing choice costs in total, what risks sit behind that cost, and what asset or flexibility remains after the payment is made. A loan estimate separates principal and interest from the estimated total monthly payment. CFPB warns that taxes, insurance, and assessments may sit inside escrow or arrive separately in large bills. A low advertised mortgage payment can also depend on points paid up front, a larger down payment, or costs rolled into the loan. That is why two loans with the same interest rate can demand different cash at closing and different cash over time. The useful comparison starts with written estimates for the actual property, not a generic calculator. It then adds expenses the lender does not control, such as local taxes, association dues, utilities, and a realistic repair reserve. Mortgage amortization also changes the timing of equity. CFPB explains that early in a typical fixed-rate loan, most of the payment goes to interest because the balance is still high. Consider a purely illustrative $400,000 30-year loan at 6.5%. Principal and interest are about $2,528 a month. In the first payment, roughly $2,167 is interest, and only about $362 reduces the balance. Taxes, insurance, and maintenance would be additional. This example is not a forecast or a quote. It shows why selling after a short holding period can leave much less newly built equity than the sum of the checks suggested. The down payment has two roles. It lowers the amount borrowed and creates equity on day one, but it also ties up liquid cash. On a $400,000 purchase, 20% is $80,000. If $80,000 compounded at a hypothetical 6% for 30 years, it would grow to roughly $459,000 before taxes and fees. That is not a promise that investments will return 6%, and it is not proof that renting wins. A home can appreciate while the mortgage balance falls. The calculation simply makes the alternative use of the cash visible. A fair comparison models both paths with conservative, changeable assumptions. Buying and selling also create transaction costs. CFPB reported median mortgage closing costs of $6,000 in 2022, before counting every cost a household may face later when it sells. Fees vary by loan, provider, property, and location, so a national percentage pasted onto every house could mislead. The practical lesson is narrower. Moving soon gives fixed transaction cost fewer years to spread across. CFPB explicitly cautions that a buyer who sells in the first few years can finish with no more equity than they started with, or even less after transaction costs and a possible price decline. Time horizon is a cost variable, not a lifestyle footnote. Tax benefits are another place where a slogan replaces a calculation. IRS. Publication 936 says home mortgage interest is generally claimed only by taxpayers who itemize deductions on Schedule A, and deductible amounts can be limited by the loan date, balance, and use of proceeds. That means the interest deduction is not a universal rebate and should not be counted at full face value without checking a household's return. Mortgage insurance premiums are not currently deductible under the 2025 publication. Tax rules change, so any long-range model needs a current IRS check or professional advice. A benefit that may apply is different from cash guaranteed to arrive. Home equity is valuable, but it is not guaranteed to move in one direction. CFPB notes that equity rises when the balance falls or the market value rises, and falls when the market value declines. The agency points to 2007 through 2012 as a period when falling prices erased equity for some owners. Mortgage debt magnifies that movement because the buyer controls the whole property with only part of the price paid in cash. The same mechanism that can accelerate wealth in a rising market can trap a household that must sell during a decline. A model should test flat and falling prices, not only the appreciation rate, that makes buying look best. Ownership can still be the better choice even when a spreadsheet shows a narrow financial edge either way. A fixed-rate mortgage can stabilize principal and interest. A paid-off home can reduce housing costs later in life, and control over the space has real value. Renting can be better when a household needs mobility, has uncertain income, lacks a repair reserve, or can rent a comparable home far below the full ownership cost. Those are not failures of discipline. They are different risk preferences and constraints. The correct comparison gives a dollar value to what can be priced, then keeps stability, control, and flexibility visible instead of pretending they are free. A defensible rent versus buy model needs household-specific inputs, expected years in the home, cash to close, the written mortgage terms, property taxes, insurance, association fees, maintenance, comparable rent, and the return assumed for money not placed in the house. It also needs scenarios for home prices, rent growth, investment returns, and an early move. CFPB recommends trying multiple scenarios because future economic assumptions can swing the result. There is no official price-to-rent threshold that settles every case. A ratio can be a screening tool, but it cannot see the condition of the roof, the buyer's job risk, taxes, financing, or the cost of leaving sooner than planned. The post-war mortgage revolution turned ownership into a workable path for millions of families, and the census data show how dramatic that change was. It also produced an inheritance of language that treats a financial instrument as a test of adulthood. The better inheritance is the machinery itself, long-term planning, written disclosures, amortization, risk-sharing, and a willingness to compare alternatives. Rent is payment for shelter and flexibility. Ownership is payment for shelter plus a debt-financed asset, obligations and control. Neither label decides the outcome. The household that wins is not automatically the one holding a deed. It is the one whose housing choice survives the actual numbers and the life changes that the optimistic version left out.